Thank you, and thank you, Linda, for inviting me to participate in this series. So, as Linda mentioned, I'm in the jazz department. I'm a drummer, and for the past 20 or so years, I've been engaging with Korean traditional music in order to find alternative ways of performing on my instrument, which is a drum set. I might just wait till everyone sits down. So, as an emerging musician in the early 1990s, I was extremely fortunate to develop friendships and collaborations with a small core group of extraordinary musicians here in Australia. So those musicians included Phil Slater, who's sitting here, Scott Tinkler, who's a trumpet player from Melbourne, Matt McMahon, who's a wonderful pianist who also teaches here at the Con, Carl Dewhurst, who's an incredible improvising guitarist, and a few other musicians, including bassist Jonathan Brown. Now, all of us had emerged as young musicians who were deeply influenced by mainly African American jazz music. We were trying to learn to play that music, we were performing that music, but at the same time, we were also trying to develop new ways of thinking about putting music together. I felt really lucky because the community I was involved in were really trying to push the boundaries about ways you could organise improvisational activity. So, for instance, Phil Slater was sharing with me music that I'd never heard before, including music by Peter Sculthorpe. Scott Tinkler was developing new ways of organising rhythm that were really new to me, and I didn't have the vocabulary to manipulate these rhythmic materials in a way that I felt realised his conception of what this music could be. Likewise, Matt McMahon in his trio was exploring new ways of creating trio music that for me required a rethink of how rhythms were put together. And at that time, coming up through jazz music, the way I'd learned was to listen to records and practice things that I'd been taught from jazz drummers without really understanding how the rhythms were put together, that there was actually an internal grammar, a kind of logic that guided how things were organised. I knew about feelings and broader rhythmic concepts, but I didn't really have a conception of how you actually join all these little things together and why would you choose to do it one way or another. Fortunately, during the same period in the mid-90s, I was getting to work in North Asia a lot. So I would be in Korea at least 3 times a year playing jazz music in China and sometimes in Japan and various Southeast Asian countries. And I gradually started to feel that the music I was playing in no way reflected my life interest, which was making this new music with my friends and also exploring the cultures that are in our region. I felt this disconnect, and I felt that the way I was playing was somehow dishonest. At one point I ended up in New York doing a recording there, and the night before the recording I went to hear a great drummer named Jeff Tane Watts, who's been a huge influence on me. And when I was listening to him, I realised that the things I really loved about his playing, that I had tried to embrace, I kind of misunderstood. And there was a generosity and honesty about his playing which I'd never really been able to access in the way I was learning. And so I stopped playing for a while. And I came back to Australia, and I'd been working with an orphanage in Sydney which was helping out Korean orphans. They were teaching Korean orphans how to learn Korean traditional music. And I met a flute player named Uhi. And I told Uhi my sad story about not knowing how to play my instrument. And he said, "Why don't you go to Korea and study with my friend from the army? He'll show you what to do." and his name was Kang Sanil. And so I did. I was fortunate to get an Asia Link residency, and I went to Japan, to Korea to study with Sanil. Now, about a year before this trip happened, the group band of 5 names, which was Phil Slater, pianist Matt McMahon, and at that time, bassist Jonathan Brown, we had a concert with this extraordinary percussionist from Korea. His name is Kim Dae-hwan, and he was an eccentric improviser. He would play with 10 drumsticks at a time. He had a giant gong and a big drum. Sometimes he would ride his motorbike on stage. And he had the world record for writing Chinese characters on a grain of rice. I think it was 222 or something. Anyway, 240. So Kim Dae-hwan performed with us, and in the second half of this concert, we were improvising a duet together. And there were just things about the way he put rhythm together, the way he organised rhythmic materials. It wasn't Korean traditional music, but it wasn't Western rhythm. It was something else, and it really affected me. And so I came back and tried to understand what is in this rhythm, and I was searching around and couldn't really latch onto it. So I began study with Kang Sanil. During the first few lessons, it was mostly about physical practices, which I won't really get into today, but they had a really profound effect on the way I approach this instrument technically. And there's hints at it in the actual shape of the rhythms, and we can talk about that in the question time if you like. But what he did show me was this exercise, which I call exercise 1, just because it was the first thing he taught me, and he said it didn't have a name. And for me, it gave me an insight into a grammar that you could manipulate as an improviser if you could understand the key information that this exercise offered. So what I'm going to do is we're going to work our way through 3 sections of it. It's very simple, and we're going to try and see how this exercise can unlock ways of improvising. So I'm going to need your help. You will have to clap your hands. And I know some people have a thing about it. I don't clap. They play instruments, but joining hands together somehow causes stress. So here's what it is. Now, this instrument is called a changu. It's a Korean hourglass drum. It's found in most styles of music, but not in pansori. You play it with 2 sticks. And it's amazing what's happened over there in terms of sticking languages. It's very different to Western drumming. Most of the materials that Western drummers use have their origins in military snare drum calls from the American Civil War. But this is a whole other thing. So here's the first part of the exercise. That's it. We worked on that for days. So if you could, I'd like you to go. Can you do that with me? Great. Thank you. So that has a lot of information in there that is very key knowledge. Okay? The first thing it has is low, high. Low, high, low, high, low. Okay? It's not this. It's not that. It's this. Low, high. Okay? The second thing it has is long, short. Long, short, long, short, long, short, long. Okay? So I call that an archetype. An archetype being a form, a rhythmic form that you can't reduce anymore without losing the essential information that guides your understanding of what it is. If I take out one note, it's different. We don't know what's inside. It could be dabba 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 da. It could be anything. But when we get the low high together and the short long, we understand 1, 3, 1 and da, long, short, long, low, high, low. Okay? So that's our archetype. We can't reduce it, but we can amplify it, which means making it more dense, which is what we're going to do. So here's part 2. You know that? Okay? Can you do that with me? So we'll do the first one twice. Kung, ta, kung, ta, kung, kung, ta. Great. That is a big difference. What we've done is we've changed it by one note. We've added a single note. Okay? Now I'll show you the third part. Okay, now we'll clap it. Here we go. We'll do all 3, two times each. And great. So what we have is we have 3 different rhythms. Kung, ta, kung, kung, ta, kung, kung, ta, kung, kuku, ta. So we've got 3 different rhythms, and the way we got to them was we added a single note each time, okay? So it's kung, ta, kung, kung, ta, kung, ta, kung, kuku, ta. A single note, and it goes on and on. So I gave that process a name. I called it serial amplification, meaning that there's a series of amplification events which we progress through by adding a single note at a time. Now this had a huge impact on me because finally I had this way of understanding how you can take something simple and turn it into something complex without thinking in a complex way. You can keep a very simple archetype in your mind and amplify it. So I'll show you the whole exercise which I transferred onto the drum set. And you can hear how, once it gets to a pretty complicated stage, you can still feel that original kung ta archetype. Here we go. Now this, when I was first taught this, I didn't tell the teacher, but he would teach me and then I'd run to the room I was staying and try and play it on the drum set. I didn't really want to get good at this instrument. I wanted to get better at this instrument. And so the focus was not so much trying to become a professional Korean drummer, it was trying to become a better Australian drummer. So here we go, this is the exercise. Okay, so that's the first part. Now, what he wanted me to understand, the exercise, the goal of the exercise is that you understand the last one, this one. The idea is you understand that, but in your mind you're thinking, kum, ta, kum, and all this other stuff is happening. It took me a long time to really grasp that because there's feeling changes that you progress through. But once I understood it, it meant that no matter how dense the music got. I could maintain a very simple idea at the core of it. So I took that exercise and I added a few things to it, because you rarely get to play drums with one hand. And so I thought about ways of trying to get the feeling of a Korean percussion ensemble. Now, the percussion ensembles usually have someone playing a long low note on a long gong, on a large gong, a smaller gong, which is like a kind of melody. It's a very loud instrument, very good for outdoors, not great for indoors. A drummer playing a low drum, and then changu. And so I thought about when those groups play together, they're very organised, everything's unison. But I don't need to do that because I'm just playing by myself, or just at least playing the drum set by myself. I can start, I can stop, I can change tempo. What information is key? And I thought it's this idea of serial amplification. So here's the exercise again. I'll play through it much quicker, and I'll add these cymbal parts just to show you how it can become quite a full sound. But we'll start with the original exercise. So that for me was the beginning of unlocking information that I felt was key knowledge in the exercise that you played the first three parts of. That was just the start. Now, there's another piece of key knowledge contained in that exercise. It's long, short, okay? Long, short, I should have said. Long, short, long, high, low, high, low. Now, lots of Korean music is sort of organised around piecing together these medium to very large structures that are basically combinations of long and short. I'd like you to try and clap this one. It sounds like this. Again. One more time. Great. Long, short, long, short, long. Long, short, long, short, long. How about this one? This is a little bit different. Pa, ta. Keep going. Very good. Long, long, short, long, short, long. Long, long, short, long, short, long. It's a beautiful phrase. If we had more time, we could unlock tension and release that's contained in that phrase, but we won't. For now, we'll just stick to what that can open up for you. Long, long, short, long, short, long. The other one we did was long, short, long, short, long. We didn't do this. Long, short, short, long. Okay, that rarely happens. But if we use this as a code, long, short, long, short, long, 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 short, long, short, long, 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 short. Basically, we just don't say short 2 times in a row. We can actually improvise our own large, potentially infinitely long structures just based on this simple code. So what I'd like to do, just as a little test, is I'll start, and then a few people, funnily enough, these three people, will attempt to improvise as well. And what we'll do is we'll just clap rhythms freely using long and short, but we're not going to play short more than once at a time. So I'll start. Yeah. Now, that was interesting. Can you try again and just play long or short, but not longer and short? Right. Try again. I'll start. Beautiful. So those three guys were just improvising. We hadn't planned that. They were just using this simple material as a guide to creating a kind of rhythmic flow. Now, if you combine that idea with serial amplification, where any simple rhythm has this multitude of options that you can apply randomly, as an improviser, I don't need to stick to the process. I can use the process to understand my options, but I don't need to play the process when I perform. It gives me a range of options. Okay, and that's an important thing, because in Korea you rarely find people improvising with the materials that the process offers. Okay, so that's something we can actually work together with. It's an opportunity for us to work with Korean drummers and look at ways of kind of reorganizing the material. A lot of times in Korea, I've played traditional rhythms as a basis for improvising, but we develop the music through the process, whether it be serial amplification or another process that's contained in the music. But if you just unlock all of that and just think about high, low, long, short, and all those options you've got. So I'm going to play for you a little bit. I'm just going to improvise for a couple of minutes using long, short, but I'm going to orchestrate it slightly with low, high. Because if I just play it long, short, it sounds like this. And it's very rare as a drummer to be called regularly to do that kind of thing. So here we go. Then I was only thinking long, short, and trying to improvise within the archetypal streams that I was creating there while I was improvising. Now, that kind of playing, you can just go on and on. It's so much fun. And what you don't need is anything pre-organised. You don't need a structure. You don't need kinds of classic drum fills. The interest in the music is developing tension and release through streaming, which means improvising with, in this case, long and short, by using variations that have appeared through developing and working on this process, serial amplification. So it's a simple idea, but it can lead to a whole lot of options as an improviser. And it basically unlocks the way you think about the drum set. Now, my teacher, he didn't think about this instrument that way, but the way he taught me kind of unlocked that way of thinking. And I'm deeply grateful to him for his way of communicating what's involved in playing a drum, which no one had ever talked to me about this way of doing it before. So if you are a musician and you're trying to find ways to manipulate rhythm, if you can start with long, short, trying to improvise with that material, and then have a think about what kind of variations you can use. You've basically got long, so you can fill that one in, and you've got short, you can join them together. There's all sorts of options there. Now, a few years ago, a group that both Phil and I are members of, a group called Baker Stuff, which is led by Rick Robinson, embarked on a project based on Rick's family and his ancestry, which is he's of Norfolk Island origin. And so he wanted to create music that was somehow drawing on hymns that had emerged with the community that ended up on Norfolk. And he wanted me to develop ways of playing the drums which sounded like Polynesian drumming. Now, I don't know if you've ever heard Polynesian drumming, but it's extraordinary, powerful music, usually played by a group of drummers with log drums, which these are from the Cook Islands. And I was thinking about it, and I was thinking, how can I use the materials that I have in a way that gets that energy, but is improvised, and also is things that I already know about. I don't want to have to learn a whole new range of materials, because the stuff we just talked about, it's a simple idea, but it's a lot of practice. And so I wanted to try and continue on this path of using these very simple archetypal forms in ways that could create new music. Anyway, so I was thinking about this project, and then one night I woke up in the middle of the night for some reason, and I don't know why, and it sounds ridiculous, but this is what happened. The cafe scene from Star Wars came to mind. And in that scene, there's a band playing, and they're playing this sort of traditional jazz, and I was really upset. I was thinking, that's not what you would hear in that place. And I thought, that drummer has so many arms. Why would you do that? And I was like, no, that is not the sound. If I could make some music for that drummer, what would it be? And so I came up with this plan, and at first I didn't realise how complicated this was going to be. And so I wanted to devote some music to this creature, and I also wanted to come up with some music for the Baker Stuff project. And so this idea came to me where I could simultaneously play different kinds of archetypes that I've learnt in Korea, so I have a strong feeling for them, but I could play them all at the same time, and maybe that would generate this kind of energy. And so we'll work on one right now together, and then I'll play for you, and I'll talk about the problems that come up when you try and do this. So first of all, can we practice, again, the two rhythms we already learnt? So here's the first one. Beautiful. And here's the second one. Fantastic. Now, if we can, James Greening, right where you are, if you can be the middle of the room, if it's possible, can everyone over here play? And can we all play this, the other one? Thank you. Thank you very much. Now, the thing is, Polynesian music, well, generally the drumming is not as slow as what you just played. It's very quick. And so that idea sounds simple enough at first, but when you go and when you're trying to play that way, it's extremely difficult. But I was really set on the idea, and I'm really thankful I followed it through, because it brought up issues about that first exercise that I would never have known about otherwise. Okay? So here's a taste of sort of how, at the kind of speed I was thinking about it. So something like this. So the idea there was trying to play Korean archetypes in one hand, different length archetypes in the other hand. So that one had, the one this side of the room played was 8 beats long, eighth notes long. But this one is 10, so it's a bit different. It sounds like this. So they're different lengths, so the resolutions take a long time to come together. And the more complex, the further the difference is, the longer it takes to resolve a phrase. Now that means when you improvise, you either see the phrase through till its ending, or you try and chop them up halfway. It's really hard to chop these up halfway. There's so much computing going on. It's so difficult that it's not really conducive to doing it with other people around. It's just too difficult. You can't, but I didn't know that when I started to work on these rhythms. So I was really happy with where they were going. And the way I practice is I'm very into these kinds of process-based practice schedules. So when you start, you don't know what will happen at the end. You have no outcome. You just have a process. You have to trust in the process. So my way is I start a long way from where I'm going to end up. And I imagine I'm underwater, and then I give myself a year. And after a year, I lift my head up and look around and question whether this is worth doing. And if I'm feeling optimistic, I say, I'm not there, but it will mean something eventually, and then I go back. And so the reality is, with those kinds of rhythms, it just takes a long time to develop them. So in order just to coordinate it. It's just so complex, it takes a while. Now, that's very different to what I showed you earlier, where to me, this kung, ta, kung, kung, ta, kung, ku, ku, ta, very simple, one note at a time, you end up with this vast range of variation through a very simple process. But the process I'd come up with was not simple, it was very complex. It was a different kind of outcome. I feel like Korean music offers some really interesting ways of organising rhythm. Long, short, tension and release by using long, short, low and high, and serial amplification. Now, there's a whole lot of other fantastic things that Korean music and the percussive traditions in Korean music have to offer. But I thought if you can leave here and understand those very simple ideas, that you can take an archetypal cell, You can add one note at a time to it. You can end up with a whole bunch of variations. You can put music together, just streaming long and short, and use all those variations to develop the music. Well, that's a lot to know. And if you ever get to hear some Korean percussion groups, you'll definitely hear that in the music. And it's fantastic when you can recognize it. Okay? But it is a process. My understanding is, well, my guess is that the music that that exercise is associated with is farmers' music. And the farmers would walk from one part of town to the other. Sometimes it would take a long time. So if they played all their songs in the first 2 minutes, they'd have nothing to do. So they make the songs last a long time. So if you just add one note at a time through a process, you get to play it like 10 times longer than you would if you just played it as is. So it's a great way to make the music last for a while. But it's also a beautiful developmental process. So hopefully you understand those two ways of thinking. I'm just checking the time. Okay. Okay. Okay, so now the final thing I'd like to show you is the way I played that previous exercise was very rigid. In terms of the sounds, there wasn't much variation. But also, there wasn't much variation in the way the rhythm was articulated in terms of feeling. Now, there's something interesting that happens in Korea. I think it's because of Western notation. When you learn the music, there are now exercise books which put the music into either 3/4 or 12/8 meters. So when you study that exercise that I showed you, you play it like this. Now, if you could, I'm going to play it again, but it'd be great if you could clap this. Could you do that? Okay, that is not right. That is not how the music is felt. But that's how it's taught at first. But the feeling is this. Which is actually a quintuplet. If you play a grouping of 5 notes within the beat, you actually get it right. So if you could clap this instead, right? Beautiful. That's great. So that feeling is this. Coom, cuckoo ka, cocoon, cuckoo ka, cocoon, cuckoo ka, cocoon. Not this. Coom, cuckoo ka, cocoon, cuckoo ka, cocoon. Two very different ways of thinking about rhythm. Now, the way I latched onto that was I sort of computed. I cheated and I just thought, wait a minute, he's playing a quintuplet, that's what it is. But that's not how people would have learned in the past. And so this feeling where you, instead of chopping the beat up into 3 equal sections, you feel it as a circular motion, coom, cuckoo ka, coom, cuckoo ka, cocoon. And within that space, you can do all sorts of things. You can arrange the beat in an uneven way. And not uneven as in 5 notes of equal value, uneven. They all have their own length. And you fit them into this shape. Coom, ka, coom, ka, coom, cuckoo ka, cocoon, cuckoo ka, cocoon. That idea is being used in hip hop a lot these days, where instead of chopping the beat up into equal values, it's become a loop with unequal things happening inside it. If you've heard the music of D'Angelo, Kendrick Lamar, Jay Dilla and others, that's how they're conceiving of the music. It's not even chopping up. Now that's a great idea and it has a name. It's called hohoop. And it was explained to me as meaning body breathing, body motion. It's a way of thinking about rhythm in terms of breath length loops. So I tried to apply that idea to these rhythms I played you before. And so this one here, which is a little bit tricky, it's combinations of groups of 5 and groups of 7. It sounds like this. sound that great to me when you play it as it's meant to be. But if you add the whole hoop and change the length of the phrases slightly, each note having its own kind of unique feeling, then it kind of gets interesting. So for me, that way of playing has a lot more connection to the kinds of feelings that you hear being generated in Korean music. I've tried to take the idea of hohop and attach it to these rhythms that are using Korean archetypal forms but have nothing to do with Korean traditional music. They're just another way of organising music using this material that I've received from Korea. But the outcome is very different. In fact, if I were to play what I just played to you in Korea, musicians wouldn't recognise it as having any relationship to their music. But to me, the connection is very clear. Very strong archetypal forms, serial amplification, whole hoop in a way to manipulate the shapes of the rhythms. So I hope today you get an insight into the kinds of things that musicians these days are doing in terms of how they engage with different forms of music. The days of people travelling to a foreign country, kind of taking some music and putting jazz on top of it is not really what it's all about. These days it's an exchange. It's an exchange of process, it's exchange of materials, improvisatory concepts. But the thing is, it takes a while to develop. These kinds of processes, you have to invest a lot of time and a lot of trust in the process in order to reveal the improvisational possibilities that's contained in it. But for me, a place like Korea, the way that rhythms are organised offers so many interesting ideas for organising rhythm. But the thing is, you may not find out about those simply by learning the music. You need to pull it apart and try and understand the grammar and mash it up and see if there's other ways of organising it. So yeah, if you're a musician and you attempt to do that thing, please get in touch with me. So thank you.
Questions for Simon? In the first example, improvisation that you did with the long and short,
yeah.
Were you thinking of an underlying pulse?
No, because again, there's no need to. I mean, if we were playing a pop song, I would, but we're not. I was just improvising. So for me, changing pulse offers just a way of creating some tension. So, but I was thinking, gunga gung gunga gung gung gunga gunga gung 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 ga gung gung ga gung gung ga and trying to amplify all those kinds of phrases. But yeah, at the basis was something very simple, but changing tempos as a means to just generate certain feelings. Yeah.
When I was in Hawaii studying Eastern drama, there's what they call fusion.
Yep.
Well,
that's an interesting word, isn't it? Because to me, the word fusion usually, for me, it feels like the results are more about cobbling things together, things that already exist. So jazz rock, that idea of it's produced by putting those things together. The thing is, what came out of these processes, I had no idea at the start. And like I said, the result is unrecognisable as being of Korean origin, but it is. So for me, it's more like procedural engagement, trying to understand what the core knowledge is that's contained in a music. Now, I think a lot of people think that the core knowledge is the sound or the rhythms perhaps, but to me it's not. It's the grammar, the guiding idea that glues it all together. And I think about rhythm like sentences. And so this idea of it's more about understanding how these various bits are put together, not so much what those bits actually are. It's a different kind of thinking. And so I personally wouldn't use the word fusion, but I don't mind if someone does. But that tends to mean something else usually.
North or South Korea? Is it over all Korea? Were you in South Korea?
Yeah, look, I know people that have travelled to North Korea. It's very difficult, and a lot of the traditions have either been wiped out or changed dramatically. It's really sad because, yeah. Oh, yeah, Nelson.
Yeah, do you know of any harmonic instrumentalists, pianists, for example, that have been able to apply this process in a way that incorporates full range of harmonic possibilities?
No, but I do know Jen Shu. Have you heard of Jen Shu? She's a singer from the United States. She's an improvising vocalist, and she also plays a variety of harmonic instruments. She has gone to Korea and studied the language, studied pansori singing, and studied kayagum, which is a kind of zither. And she's producing this music now, which is really interesting. It's kind of, again, unrecognisable as Korean, although she's singing in Korean. And you feel this connection to the grammar of how the rhythm's organised, but it's very different. So apart from her, there's not many people that are really taking it apart and trying to produce something different. Although there's a bassist from Melbourne named Chris Hale, and he's done something really interesting. He's a PhD student here, and last year we did a creative music intensive in Cairns, and at this intensive there were 4 young Korean traditional musicians, one of whom was a drummer named Woo Min Young. Now, in Australia there's a guy named Greg Sheehan he's a national treasure. He's an educator and drummer, and he's come up with this great system for putting rhythms together called number diamonds. Anyway, we came up with this idea for Min Young where we would take all these variations, like some of the things I played you, from shaman music in Korea, which she knows really well, and we would assign them to different numbers, and she could learn to manipulate them in a way she'd never done before. And it was amazing because her computational skills and her amazing improvisational ability meant that she could do it instantly, and it was extraordinary. Anyway, she has taken this process, she's gone home, she's started a new band, she's written all this music, doing things no one's ever done on the instrument before. And Chris has written music for her, and his PhD will be talking about what's involved in that. So that's really exciting to see a Korean drummer take on a process that's come from overseas, try and look at their instrument in a different way in order to produce new music. So the results of that project will be available in a couple of years, I think. Yeah.
Sorry, I'm trying to think how to phrase it or pose it. So it's so clear when you're playing, you're clarinet, and you're phrasing. So I'm trying to imagine when you're improvising, group improvisation.
Yeah, so that's an interesting question. Again, essential information. When you're playing jazz, you may think, if you're a drummer, a lot of what you do is sort of predetermined. You hit a ride cymbal and you sort of try and outline the pulse, and you do other things. And so why not do it with that material? Who knows? And so you can. So everything I played there I learnt in Korea. But you wouldn't know that if you were playing with me, and I wouldn't need to tell you. It's just a way of organising the rhythm. It goes beyond style. So when you play with other people, I think you can draw on whatever organisational principle you have, but it doesn't mean you can't do it with others.
So with the bittersweet,
Yes.
you were utilising this kind of concept
Yeah.
all the way through.
All the time. Pretty much everything I play these days is formed from that experience. Now there's a whole bunch of other processes and vocabulary ideas that I've been working on. It all has its origins either in thoughts about Korea, using materials in a way that they would never use to produce something else. But yeah, pretty much every note that I play is somehow the organisational principle that guided how that worked has its origins in there, even though the style of music has nothing to do with it. So there's things about unison and multiple lines and all these things which have come from that study. But yeah, you're playing them in a reggae song, so it's undetectable. But it's a great way to guide the way that you organise your improvisational focus.
Because when we were playing, it was so obvious. The groove was so obvious, but it was so obvious it was totally unique the way you were playing.
Yeah, well, for me, it's a kind of strength of, it gives you a sense of strength of purpose when you're, especially if you're a freelance musician, if you can have a central core idea of how you put things together, that transcends style. That's more about, basic grammatical organisation, so that it doesn't matter what the style is, but you can feel confident that your choices have a kind of a core idea to them that guides them.